Hey guys, my name's Khadroth, and today we're going to be talking to you about Archetype Earth, aka Arcueid. Now, Arc, as she's better known by everybody, is a obviously very popular Type Moon character from the Tsukihime franchise. She did not originate with FGO as much as I would like to meme it so, and she's definitely going to be a very, very sought after unit. She's going to be showing up this anniversary here basically as the featured unit. And it's actually a pretty decent banner because you'll also be having the addition of Shu Fu. We will talk about her actually in a subsequent video after this one. And there's definitely some decent Cs, particularly A, as it is a very, very nice CE if you manage to get MLB of it being a 60% starting charge CE. But other than that, I think the big consideration everyone's going to have with Arcueid is, do they actually need her? And I'm going to go ahead and just say this right at the very beginning of the video to just kind of alleviate people's concerns. If you really like Arcueid, there is no problem rolling Arcueid. She is a very good unit. If you don't want to roll Arcueid for whatever reason, you do not have to have her. She is not an essential unit by any stretch of the imagination. There is some really nice stuff that she can do, but you are not required to have her. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, I'm going to stump for her here, and we're going to try to give the best case for why you should get her. Just understand that you do not have to, and it is 100% your choice. So, just to begin with, again, she is a limited unit. As of this current moment of recording this video, and again, it may be some days before I actually get the video posted to YouTube, but there has not been another Archetype Earth banner. That is to say, Arcueid has not had another banner in FGO. The only other banners that she appears on are all lucky bag summonings, which are GSSRs. So she's not held out of the GSSRs like Draco has been, but she has not had an actual raid up since her original one. In that regard, this does sort of require a little bit more of a special consideration. She will certainly get another banner in the future. She will not be a unit where they created her only to give her one banner, because that would be dumb and they would never make any money off of her ever again. But you have to at least understand that if you do not roll her at anniversary, at minimum, it's going to be a long time before you see another banner, since JP, now almost 2 years ahead of us, has not seen another one still to date. There is a prevailing theory that she will be the unit on the 30 million downloads campaign whenever it arrives, and that might be the case, or it might be, if we don't get a download campaign before anniversary, that she just shows up as an anniversary unit on the banner there 2 years again later. But either way, I'm going to say that's going to be a long time before you get another shot at her, so that's why you need to consider whether or not you wish to roll. I will say one of the biggest considerations for most people is going to be the upcoming summer event, which has 3 very good SSRs in it. So in that regard, this is going to be a sort of hot button issue for a lot of people. But do keep in mind, you will get a really nice influx of courts from the anniversary. Just don't expect to get the full 1,000 number that you see flying around, as everything is limited by milestones. But these are going to be the things that you need to consider as to how much you'll have, whether or not you can hit pity, and how much you think you need to save for potential summer rolling if you were trying to think about rolling Arcueid. With that all out of the way, we can now begin to talk about what Arcueid is as a servant. So she is going to be as we already denoted, limited 5-star unit. She is going to be an AOE Buster Mooncancer. And while that might not sound like the most appetizing thing just at face value, she actually has a very good kit that has a lot of things that you should try to consider. So let's go ahead and start by talking about the raw stats here. You guys can see that Arcueid starts out with about 11.6k attack. This is actually not very strong. It's not bad. It's just kind of right there, average in the middle of what you would expect for a lot of SSRs. She does at least have 14k HP, which is also not that great. It's just not bad either. It's just, again, kind of right there in the middle, just sort of balanced, if you will. You can see that she is star attribute. She has 50 star absorption and 15 star generation, both of those coming in right on average for the Mooncancer class. And then she ends up also having 0.45 NP charge attack. This is actually exceptionally low and probably a lot lower than we're used to seeing for a Mooncancer. But it's not going to be a huge concern given the fact of how her kit works. Now you can see she only has the 3% NP charge defense, but again, this is sort of a standard amount. And then she has a fairly low death rate here at 0.6%. Again, not gonna be the worst stat for her, given the fact that you might be taking her into a scenario either as a backline unit or as your main damage dealer where there might be death proc flying around. So it could certainly be a thing that would actually be of benefit to her. Just again, as always, pay attention whenever you're dealing with death proc. Her alignment here is chaotic good in stages 1 and 3, and then neutral good in stage 2. So again, she's always going to be good for you, but you definitely need to question as to whether or not you want her to have either chaotic or neutral alignment, depending on buffs that might be flying around in the party. Thankfully, there's not going to be too many that affect that sort of thing, so you shouldn't have to worry about it too much. And I'm going to say you can kind of put her in whatever ascension form that you want. She is a female gendered unit, and her traits are Intimate Elish Nullification, Humanoid, Immune to Pigify, and a non-hominidae servant, and just a normal servant. There's actually not a whole lot here to exploit. Probably the most exploitable one is Humanoid. Everything else here is just kind of meant to be an anti-trait more than anything. You can see her deck here is double Buster, double Arts, with a singular Quick card. The interesting part about this is, given the fact that she has a Buster Noble Phantasm, it does mean that you're going to be able to form triple Buster Brave chains if you manage to get both of her cards at the same time in conjunction with that NP. But the good news is she still has the 2 Arts cards to help out with that NP generation issue, and you can see they're no slouch having 4 hits on them. In fact, her hit counts across the board are either average or better in the case of both her Arts and Quick cards. The only downside that you might be able to say out of this is she doesn't have maybe like the 4 different cards, aka another Quick card or another Arts card, to really help out with NP generation. But again, being a Buster unit, I'm not really sure that we care, especially since a lot of the time we're going to be running Arcueid alongside of her, and also potentially having that extra charge on her Buster cards should that actually come into play. So at the end of the day, it is a nice thing for her to have, but it's, just kind of what we expected for the kit. For the deck. Now, talking about the actual kit here, we're going to get to the first skill. And you can see it's going to seal all enemy skills for 1 turn. This is certainly a nice feature, but keep in mind that whenever you seal an enemy skills, if they don't have their NP, they're just going to start attacking you, which means that you're going to start potentially taking more damage at that point than you maybe otherwise would have had they wasted their turn popping a skill. But it's kind of in a nice way, just nice to have this to stop really annoying enemy skills from actually going off. That's just always sort of the catch-22 that you have whenever you try to skill seal someone. She also will reduce the enemy's defense for 3 turns. So again, it's enemy wide, it's wave wide on the entire enemy, and it's going to be 20% down at max for those 3 turns. The upside to this is you get more damage whenever you pop this. The downside is because it's a debuff, it's not going to be carried in between individual waves. So you just have to keep that in mind whenever you apply this skill, that it may not come forward with you into a subsequent wave after that. She's going to increase her own attack for 3 turns by a standard amount of 30% here. And that's definitely going to be nice, especially given the fact that this skill is going to be on a 6-turn cooldown. This means that with double Koyanskaya setups, you're going to be able to double pop this skill, particularly on turns 1 and 3. That means that you're going to have it right there at the beginning to apply to that first wave, and then you will have it again on wave 3 to get not only more attack up, but also get that defense down on the actual waves that you would probably need it for. Remember that when we're dealing with someone like Arcueid as a Mooncancer, we're naturally dealing with what we like to refer to as a neutral looper or a just neutral damage dealer. For most targets, Arcueid is going to be neutral. And the reason why is because unless she's interacting with a ruler or an avenger, she doesn't really have any sort of extra damage bonus. So the only other exception to that rule is going to be berserkers. If you take her against berserkers, she'll absolutely slap them down because, again, she's going to deal effective damage. But certainly for most other scenarios, if you try to take her in, she's going to instead be dealing 1x damage rather than any sort of effective modifier. But there's a little bit of ways that she can kind of help out with that. Obviously, the doubling up of skills is certainly one of them, but there is still another bigger one still to come. Next, we get to the second skill here, and there's a lot to be said about this skill for such a very unwordy skill. And the reason why is because this is a 100% charge skill. That right there just is enough to tell you, hey, pay attention, this is a good unit potentially. Whenever we see 100% charge, particularly on an AOE damage dealer, that's a sign that they can be used very effectively for, if nothing else, farming applications. So she is a 5-star that definitely makes her a little bit more expensive than your average Arash that's floating around out there, but certainly this is a nice thing for her to have. She's also going to increase her own NP damage for 3 turns whenever you do manage to pop this by 20%, so she's got that going for her. In a weird way, you might be able to actually double up this skill, then allowing you to get multiple turns of the NP damage buff. But again, this can be somewhat hairy and requires certain specific comps in order to be able to do this. Still, it is a really, really nice thing, and if you did manage to double it up, you would be able to do it on turns 1 and 3. That being said, because it is a 7-turn cooldown, this means that it does not double up conventionally in the Koyanskaya system. Koyanskaya can only reduce cooldowns by 4. You have 2 other turns by which your cooldown would be reduced. So the maximum normal value here is 6 turns of cooldown that you can kind of be able to deal with. So the second we deal with 7, that means we're going to be 1 off. So we have to find some other source of cooldown reduction. And there are numerous other units that might function to this capacity and allow for this to be the case. It does not have to be any particular unit, the least of which we could say it could be someone like Maid Altar, a Buki Summer, or again, even, other units that have any sort of cooldown reduction. So again, even someone like Tamamo, if you manage to actually work in her NP somehow. All of that is possible should you so try. But regardless, probably one of the best ways to handle this is going to actually be to use the Atlas Institute Mystic Code. That Mystic Code just has natural cooldown reduction on it. So the only problem with it is going to be that you're going to be taking that over taking something like Plug Suit and all the firepower that that can provide, especially with a 3rd support. It does mean that you would be able to pop this skill on turns 1 and 3, as we already mentioned, meaning that you would have 200% of the 300% charge required to 3-turn already covered by this skill should you manage to get the cooldown reduced. Well, with a double Koyanskaya setup, you're going to end up having another 100%, and that is your 300 right there. So you don't technically need the 3rd support. This is one of the ways in which Arcueid is just a very quick and easy unit to use. You can just go in there with a double Koyanskaya Arcueid setup with Atlas Institute and just laugh at things a lot of the time. The problem with this is, remember, she's a neutral damage dealer and you don't have the firepower of Plug Suit and a 3rd support. So we're not dealing effective damage and we don't have crazy scaling necessarily in this sort of setup. This is where, again, the discussion about Noble Phantasm levels is going to kind of creep in. And I will talk about that as we actually get to her Noble Phantasm, but it is definitely something to be seen, as you're going to have to weigh sort of the amount of nodes you would like your Arcueid to be able to do when you consider getting additional Noble Phantasm levels for her. And again, like I said, we'll break that down a little bit more here in a minute, but definitely this is the nice aspect to this skill, is that it is 100% charge. Now we're on to the 3rd skill. This is going to grant the entire party invincibility for 1 attack for 3 turns. This is actually really nice, especially if you're running some sort of Koyanskaya setup, because you don't really have survivability built into the kit. So now instead, the actual damage dealer is going to provide a little bit of survivability. It's not enough to kind of keep you alive down the stretch, but it is enough to at least sort of, maybe soak an NP or something like that if it happens at the wrong time. This is a nice skill, but it's probably not going to be the main reason by which you use it. In fact, even the next line is also not going to be the main reason you use this skill. We'll just go ahead and skip to it. Basically, she will charge the entire party's NP gauge except for herself, as long as you are on the Millennium Castle battlefield. This is a new field type, and it's not handled like other field types. Because the reason is, normally whenever we change the field with someone's skills, it is done by virtue of appearing on their buff bar. It is a sort of non-visible change. With Arcueid, this is new and unique. Not only will it change the background of the wave that you apply it in, it will also change, again, the buff location. It will not go on her bar. It will go up on the top right near where your master is. That is a unique way of handling it, and it definitely begs the question of whether or not the devs will start to work in other things like this buff in the future. Still, we haven't seen hide nor hair of anything like this in the 2 years since Arcueid has been out, but who knows? Maybe it's a taste of things to come. Either way, it is certainly an interesting way to handle a battlefield buff, because it means that it will get carried 2 additional waves regardless. So it does not necessarily have to be reapplied every single turn. Once it's put up, it is there until it expires. Definitely an interesting way of handling it. But the interesting aspect to this is going to be, again, that the NP is what actually applies the Millennium Castle battlefield buff. So after she does that, then she is going to be able to charge the entire party by up to 30%. This makes her, in a weird way, a sort of like cheeky, easy, like 30% party charger, a la someone like Koyanskaya of Dark. And in a weird way, just like Koyanskaya of Dark, while she does have this supportive capability, she's also a little bit more selfish for herself and wanting to kind of, actually be the center of attention. So unfortunately, she doesn't charge herself this 30%. But the good side about this is that she will help maybe potentially another support get to their NP to do so. And that can actually be really nice. So we'll talk about that here in a second as well. But you can see this skill is all going to be on a 6-turn cooldown, which means, again, you can get it back on turns 1 and 3. So you could potentially do this multiple times in a 3-turn cadence. So again, we already talked about the invincibility, so that now leaves the fact that it's going to increase the party's buff removal resistance if they are good alignment. What does that mean? That means you will not be able to strip the buffs off of people in Arcueid's party if they are good alignment thanks to this. Now, interestingly enough, obviously the logical pairing for her is going to be someone like Koyanskaya of Light, and you're not going to have good alignment with her. But there may be other units where this actually would come into play, and it really just depends on sort of the setup that you're trying to use with her. Obviously, lawful good, you do have someone like Merlin that could certainly work with her, so there are going to be some people that you might actually combine her with on this. But yes, naturally, this is not going to be something that just in the general course of farming is even remotely useful to you. This is going to be more for challenge applications. And while I say that, I will say that this is going to be really nice for someone like him that's going to buff her. And he's not the only one who is out here as classified as good. As again, you can see there's Zerker Artoria basically, and essentially Caster Artoria here as well. So in a challenge environment, yes, you might actually have a Castoria alongside her, even if it weren't the case of, actually being the correct buff type to actually help out Arcueid. At least you would have Solemn Defense, and Arcueid would be able to help a Castoria get to her NP. So it'd definitely be a nice thing to have. Okay, so now with that, we've kind of covered the third skill here. And you guys can see it's a very nuanced skill, but it's very nice in what it can do for the party. Then we get to her crazy passives, and I say crazy because you can see there's just a ton of them. So she gets magic resistance A plus for 21% debuff resistance, territory creation EX for additional arts card performance for those 2 arts cards, definitely nice. Item construction A to increase her own debuff success rate. Independent action A to increase her critical damage by 10%. So again, just extra actual damage there. Something that normally archers only have, but I guess, hey, Mooncancer, why not? And then the unique passive of Original One, which is that whenever the Millennium Castle battlefield is in play, increases her own quick arts and buster performance by 30%. So Arcueid gets a little bit stronger. Now, you're not going to get the benefit of this stacking multiple times, but it is a really, really good effect to have, given the fact that it's not only going to increase her NP, it's going to increase all of her card performance as well. So definitely a really solid buff to have. Now, with regards to her append skills, obviously there is something to consider with mana loading. The thing with Arcueid is, unless you're taking her into a non-conventional team comp, you are not going to need her mana loading. She is definitely one of the units in the game where you're going to have to make a strong case for actually needing it. That being said, there might be some, especially if you're trying to just have her maybe take out one wave and buff someone else. But I'm going to say it's certainly just going to be this like consideration that you have, but maybe not the best use of your coins. Her third skill here is going to be anti-foreigner attack damage aptitude as well, which might not be the best either. She's certainly going to have some applications, but not necessarily a crazy thing. So, and part of this is going to be because of the actual super effective niche that Arcueid has on her actual NP. It's actually going to kind of have some synergy here with foreigner enemies. So this might be the best use of her of her append, but it just kind of depends on how you want to use the coins. Again, we don't fight that many foreigners in the game, so to me, probably one of the better options is actually going to be the extra attack finesse, but it really just depends on how much you want to use your Arcueid and what situations you find yourself using her in more farming applications versus more challenge applications. Totally up to you. I'm going to say, out of all the units that I've reviewed, this one is certainly a wash across the board. It very much is a pick your own poison type of situation. There is not, to me, a clear front runner for which one should be taken. You can't really go wrong with the extra attack finesse, but you may find that one of the other ones might actually just be more situationally useful for you and your account. So in that regard, just kind of make your best choice for what you think would work well on her. Now we get to the Noble Phantasm damage in and of itself. So she is a 4-hit AOE Buster NP, as you guys can see here, and she will change the field to Millennium Castle battlefield for 3 turns, activating first. It's going to then deal damage to all enemies. So the good part about this is, boom, there you go. She is going to have this right away. And then, as you guys can see, she will deal extra damage to enemies with the chaotic alignment. The interesting thing to denote about this is with normal units, the NP level scales the damage, and that just is the way it is. With Arcueid, you obviously have this, but you also have additional scaling added to each additional NP level. She is going to scale her super effective anti-chaotic modifier based off the number of NP levels of her you get. Say what you want, but this is strong. Now, the interesting part about this is also kind of scummy the way you want to think about it. Because while this is strong, this does sort of extra incentivize you to roll for additional NP levels for her. Because you can see, even the first copy is going to bump that up from 150% already to 175. Now, I'm going to say it's not a requirement by any stretch of the imagination, but this is definitely something that we should consider across the board with every neutral damage dealer that we try to take into a node. is NP1 enough? For most normal units, the answer to this is yes. For neutral loopers, it can be, but it's definitely going to impact the level of node they can handle. So, I think there are multiple ways you can think about this. Either you can choose to say, you know what, I don't care, NP1 is enough, I just want my collection copy. And that's perfectly fine. Or you can say, you know what, I do care, I'm going to start trying to get a bunch of NP levels and make sure that my Arcueid is as robust as possible and can handle as much content as possible. And then there's the in-between take, which is probably that you can go, you know what? I can probably either sit here and, kind of maybe grab an NP2, and then she'd be able to do a whole bunch of nodes with that. Or maybe I say, I'm only going to use my Arcueid when it's an actual chaotically aligned enemy. And at that point, then I'm probably still okay with NP1. So it really just depends on how you want to think about this. The reason that I say that there is this idea that you might want a second NP level with a neutral damage dealer is because they're not dealing effective damage. This does limit the amount and sort of like the HP values of the nodes that you can handle. That is to say, when we start running these numbers for you and actually show you the damage capability of a unit, you start to be able to see, oh, hey, well, yeah, when they're actually in an effective niche, they're going to blow them out of the water. But when they're not, all of a sudden, it maybe looks a little bit hairy, as you might be seeing them sitting there doing 200, 300k, and you might be staring a 90++ node in the face in the future, where the enemy just is sitting there with 1 million. And that ends up being a problem. That's why neutral damage dealers, I'm not going to say they fall off and are unusable, but they are certainly harder to use, and you can't use them in every node like you used to be able to. So this is why I say there is this consideration with regards to NP levels. Do I think you have to roll an additional NP level of Arcueid? No. But I do think the amount of NP levels that you do roll will impact kind of directly the level of node that you can handle with her. It doesn't mean that you might not be able to do a 90++ node with Arcueid at NP1. You might if the stars align and you actually have a chaotic enemy and maybe a damage C floating around. That is certainly a possibility. But the second we start trying to think about handling something that's maybe not directly aligned with her niche, yeah, then that might actually begin to, be a consideration for should we take her to that node. So again, it's up to you to determine if you want your Arcueid to try to be able to do functionally everything, or if you think that you're just okay having her and wanting her to do what she is already good at, rather than trying to make her work in every possible node that you can. So again, it's your choice, but this is the type of thing you should consider. Now, with that in mind, let's go ahead and look at the notes here on Millennium Castle Battlefield. You can see when the party moves to the next stage, the field graphic will be reset. However, Millennium Castle Battlefield's effect is still continued. So this is carried to the next wave. It's just the background won't still look like the Millennium Castle. The icon on the top right corner of the battle screen indicates this buff is active. So as long as it's there, you're good, even if the background doesn't seem to be Millennium Castle. Tapping on it will also show the duration, as you will have a new way where you can actually select it. Millennium Castle Battlefield is stackable if you use the NP in successive or alternate turns. Millennium Castle Battlefield is removed if Archetype Earth is defeated. And again, that's something you're going to definitely need to consider with regards to her, is how you want to handle this. I think Arcueid is going to be a very strong unit. I think that she is going to be somebody that is going to be somewhat game-changing in how she handles something like this. But it's not necessarily a gotta have. It's just a taste of how they can potentially handle things in the future. So we can take a look at the rest of this, but ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm going to say that you need to decide for yourself how many copies you want of her and whether or not you want her at all. So let's now then, after all of that being said about Millennium Castle Battlefield and her NP, look at the overcharge effect. She will charge the NP gauge of living human allies except for herself. Now, there's not a whole lot of living human allies, but there are some. So again, just taking a quick gander at this, really, to me, most of these are not going to be units that you will probably take alongside Arcueid. Again, you might be using someone like Reigns or Waver. They might actually be a support that you would use alongside, or maybe even someone like Kuro in a crazy enough sense if you really want it. But the majority of these units probably won't be paired with her, just depending on what your goals overall are. Maybe MASH in the case of a challenge fight. Still, it is an interesting thing, but I do find it interesting that they didn't do something like this attached to the NP and actually bring the chaotic extra damage down. So, now with that in mind, we can actually begin to talk about Arcueid's refund. And what do I mean when I say refund? Well, Arcueid's going to be a weird unit. She's a buster unit. She's not going to refund. But you are going to want to pay attention to cooldowns with Arcueid. So that is going to be one of the problems that you're going to have, is how do you juggle especially this second skill? With that in mind, we're going to start talking about actual comp structure as well as damage output for her. Because again, I don't really have to give you too much advice with regards to the craft essences for Arcueid. You're probably going to want to use Black Grail or any other craft essence that is powerful and allows you to start from zero. There are numerous recommendations we could give you for this, but ultimately at the end of the day, with a unit that you can start from zero on, the sky's the limit and you can use any craft essence that you actually think works with her. So, talking about her actual self-buff damage numbers first, you can see she basically, these are neutral numbers. Again, remember, because she is a Mooncancer, and just in general, we like to show these as neutral. You can see basically she has her normal numbers, and these are relatively, again, normal looking. They don't look too crazy here. In fact, at NP5, you're only doing 50k. But with self-buffs only, so this is not including Mystic Codes, Craft Essences, supports, things like Koyanskaya or Oberon actually coming into play here. This is just Arcueid under her own numbers. And then we have the anti-chaotic niche. And you can already see just in the relationship between these two, just how powerful that is. And the gap actually begins to widen slightly. And this is due to, again, the scalability of her NP and the fact that she is going to get even more off of that. So that is why she ends up kind of just being stronger and stronger and stronger, is due to that scaling on the additional NP levels. So again, that's going to be her base damage. From there, let's go ahead and talk about our first scenario in terms of charge for her. This is going to be a Koyanskaya of light with double Oberon. And there's kind of three different, I would say almost four different, but we're only going to really cover three different comps that you can really run Arcueid in. These are Arcueid devoted comps, so keep in mind that there's always the mix and match type of stuff that you can do. But you guys can see in this sort of scenario, the way the charge breakdown would actually work is essentially you're going to sit here with basically the 20% eaches on this, and again, a 50% off of Koyanskaya of light, essentially kind of starting with her and rotating her out for the other Oberon. And from there, she needs 10%. So this is probably a scenario in which you actually would want to have her append unlocked, or again, have some other way of getting it. But as long as you can get that 10% somehow, boom, there you go. She's going to actually have 100% to fire off the first NP. On wave 2, you're just going to go ahead and pop her charge skill. That's going to actually be really nice, and again, not make it so that you have a ton of button presses. Remember, that's going to be kind of the really nice aspect to Arcueid. It's just going to be a fast and easy 3-turn in a lot of scenarios. A really, really, really just like kind of easy to use unit. So from there, you're just going to go ahead and fire off the NP the second time. And then for wave 3, you're just going to go ahead and use both the remaining Oberon 50% charges. And that's enough. So that will actually do the trick. The issue with using a comp like this is we're not using cooldown reduction, so we're not getting to double up on Arcueid's own skills, but we're also going to kind of get the spike damage on wave 3 from the double Oberon third skills. It's just waves 1 and 2 are probably going to suffer a little bit for damage in a comp like this. Wave 3 will spike really hard. Wave 1 and 2, be careful. Make sure you have enough firepower to actually take out the node in this circumstance. So, taking a look at her actual damage in this scenario, you guys can see, again, this is going to be basically Neo Plug Suit, and this is Neo Plug with skill 1 delayed until wave 3. Because remember, you're not going to have the ability to actually double up skills. You can't pop it on turn 1 and turn 3 in this scenario. As a result, the best damage output is by delaying it until wave 3, but keep in mind, waves 1 and 2 damage, as we already said, not that great. So that's definitely an issue at play. So in the scenario in which we were to pop it right away, you can see that early spike on wave 1, and then it actually dips down for wave 2 because we don't have that defense down anymore. Wave 3, certainly that hard spike, but again, these are neutral numbers with an actual comp in mind, with actual Mystic Codes and Craft Essences. So that is 300k neutral damage at NP1. That is not bad, but it might not be enough to overcome the strongest nodes in the entire game. And then certainly we also have the chaotic damage. And when the enemies are actually chaotic, this starts looking a lot better. You're probably a lot less likely to encounter chaotic enemies in turns 1 and 2, but certainly it is possible. And then from there, God, by wave 3, you've got a crap ton more damage. And then again, you can see NP2 just starts getting even nuttier as look at the scalability there and the difference between an NP2 and an NP1. This is why I said getting that second copy is going to make a huge difference, especially in niche. Even outside of niche, you can see we have almost a 100k difference in damage just by virtue of having that second copy. And then down here with it actually being delayed so that we have the defense down on wave 3, the numbers for the first 2 waves look incredibly abysmal in that regard. It should be enough to kill most, but I'd say wave 2 is actually where you're really going to be a little bit suspect as to whether or not that will get you through the wave. And then obviously right there, you've got a little bit more spike damage compared to the prior iteration where we didn't double it up. And again, even more as we start just getting dumb. It actually ends up being quite the force magnifier. Now remember, this is just MP1 and MP2, so imagine the scalability if you get more copies of her as well. And you start to realize some of the insanity of what people can do with an MP5 Arcueid, but a lot of that's going to be, again, within that chaotic niche. As long as you have an enemy that is chaotic for wave 3, she is going to obliterate them. If you don't, well, then you maybe have a little bit more to be concerned about. Now we'll talk about the next charge scenario. And this is the charge scenario that I'm going to be honest, I actually use the most with Arcueid. This is basically just double Koyanskaya and Atlas Institute Mystic Code. It just works. It's just fast. It just hits hard. It's just solid. So again, as long as you have this, it's okay. It's just going to do the least damage out of all the Arcueid specs. So as long as you have a strong enough Arcueid to pull this off, this just makes farming a breeze. It's just easy and simple. So quite literally, wave 1, you're just going to start out by going ahead and popping Arcueid's 100% charge skill. Fire off that NP. You can also go ahead and pop the cooldown reduction skill after you've used the charge skill, so that it's just over and done with. Then from there, wave 2, you're going to go ahead and pop both Koyanskaya of Lights, 50% charges on her. They're also the cooldown reductions. So with the cooldown reductions from them and the cooldown reduction from skill 3, the next turn, you're going to just instead pop the 100% charge skill again. That's it. Nice and easy. Simple 3-turn. Quite literally 5 buttons. Not bad. So again, with that in mind, the damage though is going to have a little bit more of a concern to it. You can see we certainly had the ability to double up our skills, and that's going to result in, at least having both the buff up on turn 1, but also getting it back again for turn 2. But this is definitely a far cry from the amount of damage that we were seeing with the double Oberon spec, especially by wave 3. So again, if you want to do this, this is certainly where having that additional MP level can help. Can certainly increase the amount of nodes that you could pull an easy fluid comp like this off in, but it may be something that you want to consider as to otherwise, as to whether or not you want to do it. You can see here again, the chaotic damage is going to be a lot better, but certainly maybe it's not enough, just depending on what you're actually fighting. The second we get to NP2, these shore up the numbers quite a bit more. It's still probably not going to be enough for 90 plus plus content, because again, neutral damage. But if we're facing Berserkers, or again, heck, maybe it's actually going to be an Avenger in the 90 plus plus node, boom, we're in, and we're going to be dealing effective damage at that point and actually getting a lot better than these numbers. Certainly as well, if the enemy is chaotic, there you go. You can start seeing and actually approaching even the NP1 of the more robust comp. And then basically, as you can see, we can also delay basically the second skill 1 to wave 3. It is what it is, but I'm going to say at the end of the day, you just kind of want to go ahead and use them, and it's up to you to kind of see what you want to do. This will make wave 2 a little bit spicier, but it will allow for wave 3 to be a little bit better if you manage it this way. Okay, and then next up, we've got our scenario number 3. And I'm going to call this sort of a catch-all scenario, because the one thing I really want people to understand is you do not have to have Summer Ibuki to pull this off. So, for instance, you can see that basically the way this one is going to work is we are going to have Arcueid double Koyanskaya of Light, and then Summer Ibuki with both her skill 1 and her skill 2. The Summer Ibuki is going to be nice because she actually can provide targetable cooldown reduction. You also, interestingly enough, due to the Millennium Castle battlefield effect, could allow Summer Ibuki to handle one of the waves if you want it. That's up to you because she is a 50% charger, but you don't have to do that if you don't want. Again, it's just an option for you there. The only downside to something like this is going to be using Plug Suit and having to rotate through. But it is an option for you. So you can see, we're going to go ahead and use her charge of 100% there on turn 1, use basically the cooldown reduction there, and then essentially end up with enough to fire off the NP, and then by turn 2, we're going to be doing the double Koyanskaya of Light buffs, and then again, have the cooldown reduction to get it back for turn 3 to have the 100% charge back again, and we're going to pop that again, and that is how you're going to complete the 3 turn. It is basically Atlas Mystic code with some extra steps, but extra damage because of that. So this is a way to stretch her damage. The thing is, like I already said, you don't have to have Summer Ibuki necessarily. You can technically use anyone that can provide some measure of cooldown reduction. She only needs one more turn reduced off of that second skill. So as long as you manage to get it, anyone technically works that has that. But yes, Summer Ibuki is definitely a very, very solid option for her in this sense. Now, looking at the damage for her in basically wave 3, or sorry, scenario 3, you guys can see that we have, again, the setup right here. These are all Black Grail comps, all Neo Plug Suit. And you can see, again, the damage is going to be at least a little bit better, but still not quite where the, double Oberon setup was. And then from there, we've also got the Chaotic Niche, NP2, and NP2 with a Chaotic Niche. Again, you can also see we did factor in the delay of popping the second skill, or sorry, the first skill basically until wave 3, and boom, there you go. You get a lot more damage out of this. Essentially, as well, you've got the chaotic and NP2 adding in here and getting even more. So kind of just more of the same of what we expected. So with that, you now have a greater understanding of Arcueid's actual damage output. So how does she stack up to the competition? Who is Arcueid's competition? This is an interesting concept to think about. Well, for starters, one of those might be Summer BB. She's also our other AOE Buster Mooncancer. And yes, you can 3-turn with her, and yes, it is very similar to the way that Arcueid works. The downside is we got to use a level 100 Summer Anniversary CE in order to pull this off, basically a 60% charge C, because we don't really necessarily have that ability to start from Black Grail like Arcueid does. So, with this in mind, you guys can see the amount of damage that you're actually going to get here. It's definitely not going to be bad, but it is going to be, again, not quite Arcueid numbers. And to me, I think the real issue that we're going to have here is certainly wave 1. at 39k, almost 40k, this might not be enough to clear a robust wave 1. So you got to be a little bit careful with something like that. But otherwise, by wave 3, again, that spike damage from Oberon, not bad. And certainly in P2, bumping it up quite a bit more. The other, I'm going to say, big consideration here is going to end up being Summer Kiara. Summer Kiara is going to be sort of her arts analog. And Summer Kiara is very infamous for how hard that she can hit with her third skill. And the damage showing in the brackets is in case her debuffs from skill 3 fail. So again, that's always going to be the possibility is the enemy has magic resistance and just doesn't allow it, or maybe they're debuff immune in some way, shape, or form. But you can see here, basically, she's a 2x Castoria with Oberon and Black Grail. She's going to be a little bit more comparable. And you can see the amount of damage spike there from that third skill, and basically the amount that it is going to just really allow her to pop off with. And it's definitely a nice thing for her to have. And you can see basically that Summer Kiara does kind of bonkers damage on her own. This has always been the case. It's something we've always known. The issue with Summer Kiara is more, can you loop her? Because her refund is not the best, even for an arts unit. She does have up to 50% charge in her kit, but you always have to weigh kind of getting the 50% charge versus using it for more kind of super effective damage off of her NP. So again, it is a consideration. But I wanted to branch out from this a little bit more and say, hey, we're maybe not all of our competition is just the Mooncancers. Space Ishtar, I feel like, is sort of the kind of gold standard of neutral looping in the game. A lot of people get compared to her in that regard, so I wanted to kind of show here's where an Arcueid lands in relation to a Space Ishtar. And this is going to be sort of her best setup here with double Castoria and Oberon. Again, you guys can see she's definitely not going to be too great in the first 2 waves there, but should be passable. And by wave 3, she gets that nice Oberon spike, plus the fact that she has managed to build up basically her NP damage scaling over each NP. And so that's actually going to allow her to deal quite nice damage. NP2 spikes her quite a bit more. NP1 over here is going to be showing her with the success of her third skill's arts proc. Because again, you do have that 80% chance to proc. It will proc for you, hopefully, but 1 in every 5 attempts it doesn't. So we always kind of model it both with and without, just to kind of show you. But obviously things end up a lot better in that sense. And you can see most of these are kind of going to be a little bit better than Arcueid was showing, again, in that sort of idealistic comp for her with the 2x Oberon. But you always have that chaotic niche that can come into play and really kind of help outscale, again, a Space Ishtar. It just is what it is, and it may be something that you go after, but it might not be. Another one that I wanted to talk about, and this is kind of a sneak peek of things to come, is going to be Summer Ibuki. We already talked about using her as a possibility in pairing with Arcueid, so yeah, we may as well compare her to the new upcoming AOE Arts Berserker. Because again, that is going to be the consideration, is if I have to roll Summer Ibuki to work with Arcueid, why don't I just roll Summer Ibuki? So I think it is a fair claim to be made. And that's why I said, like, to do that comp, you do not have to use Summer Ibuki. There are other options for it so that you don't have this kind of quandary, if you will, as to like who to roll and why. So with Summer Ibuki, her best comp here is going to be double Castoria and Oberon with a Black Grail herself. These are neutral numbers, which is kind of impossible for a Berserker to do unless they're beating up on MASH or something like that. So in that regard, do understand that Ibuki's numbers are going to be actually better than this in almost all situations that she's in. And so you can see this is basically going to be 1 times effectiveness rather than 1.5 times. So certainly this can actually be quite a bit more damage just raw at NP1. And at that point, you have to start asking yourself, do I necessarily roll for an Arcueid if I'm maybe already planning on getting Ibuki? In that regard, I can't answer that for you because you might really desire Arcueid just because you like the character or its design. But I can certainly say that Ibuki is probably going to win the damage race in most scenarios. but not all. She does have the Earth super effective niche, and that is going to really allow for a lot of extra damage there. But again, we have certainly seen units over time get crazy with sort of damage scaling down the line. And now even Summer Ibuki is technically not the damage king, even within her own class. So there is considerations in that regard as to whether or not you want to go after someone like Summer Ibuki. But again, I'll save that for the Summer Ibuki video. I do think the important point to understand here is that she's super effective against Earth versus Arcueid super effective against Chaotic. And so that may factor in. Maybe you just want to cover more of your bases and have that capability of dealing effective damage against a bunch of different enemy types. That's totally up to you, but I did feel like this was a comparison that was going to be drawn, especially for a lot of people that wanted to know which unit to roll on. And then last but certainly not least, I figured let's go ahead and throw Karen in here as a quick option, because again, Karen's damage is kind of nutty. She certainly does need 3 enemies in order to be able to loop, but not always, because she does at least have a lot of charge in her kit. And still, she is a Black Grail looper in that regard, and so you can see, even though she's doing neutral damage, by wave 3, these are pretty disgusting numbers. And remember, you can always put in a, Angry Mango or something like that into the back line to get her a debuff to allow the damage to reach these numbers. So definitely a really, really nice one. But this felt like a good comparison since she is also anti-chaotic and neutral. So at that point, Karen is, to a degree, going to be someone that you're actually going to be doing a lot of comparing to. And so, again, looking back at this and basically the Arcueid comp here, you guys can see at NP1, you're looking at 299 versus 449 versus, again, Karen basically being 408 versus 612. The difference here is Karen has already had an NP interlude, so that's obviously going to factor things in. But this is why, again, I'm going to say there may be that consideration of maybe additional NP levels. I'm not going to try to pressure you to do that. It's just up to you to decide what you want to justify and, again, how much you wish to use the unit. So I hope this video has been informative for you. Thank you all for watching. I will see you guys for the Shufu video next. And again, you stay classy. I'll see you for the next one.